Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a time before central heating, before flannel pyjamas, and yes, before blankets. That's right. Tonight's story is about the brave, slightly smelly humans who faced winter, armed with nothing but body heat, questionable fur choices, and the sheer will to not die of frostbite in their own hut. Before we get started, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this kind of ridiculous history that makes you thankful for duvets. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and how many layers you're currently wearing. It's always fun to know who's already in bed and who's just pretending to work with this playing in the background. Now dim those lights, put your fan on low for that gentle white noise, get cozy, preferably under something that isn't a pile of animal skins, and relax. But before you drift off, think about this. How did people survive the freezing nights before blankets were a thing? Did they just shiver aggressively until morning? Were they snuggling with livestock for warmth? Was spooning the cow considered a normal bedtime routine? Did someone actually invent the concept of sleeping naked in fur before or after realising fleas also love warmth? Congratulations, you've just woken up in 8000 BCE. You're wearing something that might be an animal, your fire has gone out, and your roommate, an actual goat, is breathing directly into your ear. Good luck, you wake up in a cave. Not a cute Airbnb cave with fairy lights, just damp stone, dripping condensation, and the faint smell of mammoth stew. Your breath fogs in the air like you're vaping sadness. Welcome to the Ice Age, where staying warm is less about comfort and more about survival. And the phrase, bedroom temperature, doesn't exist yet. It's morning, or what passes for morning, because the sun is really just a distant flashlight struggling to shine through endless clouds. The air bites at your skin before you even sit up. You're wrapped in something that used to be an animal, and it still smells faintly like one. There's no mattress, no pillow, just a pile of hides on a cold rock floor that has the same level of comfort as a tax audit. You stretch, and your joints make the sound of snapping twigs. Congratulations, you've survived another prehistoric night. Outside, snow drifts across the landscape like nature's passive-aggressive reminder that it's in charge. Everything is frozen. The river, the trees, even the optimism. You can see your clan huddled around what's left of the fire, a few embers barely alive, glowing like the world's most disappointing nightlight. Everyone looks half asleep, half frozen, and entirely done with this Ice Age nonsense. You shuffle closer to the fire, holding your hands out, which does absolutely nothing because your hands are already numb. The fire pops and spits in protest, like it's annoyed that you expect it to solve all your problems. Firewood is scarce. You burned through most of it last night, including, possibly, part of someone's spear. Nobody's sure whose. Ownership is blurry when you're all freezing to death together. Your breath turns to mist as you look at your fellow cave dwellers, wrapped in animal hides, faces crusted with frost, hair stiff with smoke and dirt. No one's talking. Talking wastes warmth. You all just grunt occasionally to confirm that you're still alive. Someone coughs. Someone else shivers so violently they accidentally invent the concept of dancing. The wind howls through the cave entrance, a low, steady moan like the earth itself complaining about the weather. You grab a rock and try to block the opening, but the wind finds its way through every crack anyway. There's no escape from it. It sneaks into your clothes, your ears, your soul. If you ever wondered what it feels like to be refrigerated while conscious, congratulations, you're living it. Breakfast isn't much better. Someone managed to thaw a chunk of meat over the coals and it's still half frozen inside. You gnaw on it anyway, because your options are eat this or die dramatically. There's a certain satisfaction in knowing you're eating something that once tried to kill you. The circle of life now with freezer burn. Your toes are a lost cause. You stopped feeling them somewhere around midnight. You wiggle them inside your animal skin shoes, which are damp, stiff, and smell like a wet dog that lost a fight. Still, you're grateful to have them. Your neighbour across the fire doesn't. He's currently inventing frostbite. You wonder, briefly, what warmth even feels like. The concept seems fictional. Maybe someday someone will invent a magical thing called indoor heating. You picture it. A room where air isn't trying to murder you, where water isn't a solid object, and where you can sleep without worrying that your blanket will get up and walk away. It sounds like paradise, but for now, all you can do is survive the day. The fire sputters again, fighting for its life. You feed it a stick, then another, then one of your hopes and dreams, metaphorically. You and your clan huddle closer, shoulders touching, sharing body heat like the world's saddest group hug. Outside, the Ice Age stretches on endlessly, white, brutal, beautiful in a way that makes you forget how miserable you are. For a moment, as you watch snowflakes drift into the cave and melt in the firelight, it's almost peaceful. Then a chunk of ice falls from the ceiling and hits you on the head. Nature has impeccable comedic timing, and that's the cold reality of prehistory. No comfort, no blankets, just a bunch of determined humans trying not to become popsicles. You don't know it yet, but you're part of a long, shivering tradition. The first chapter in humanity's desperate, hilarious quest to stay warm. Fire isn't just for cooking, it's your emotional support system, your therapist, your entire heating plan. You and your tribe huddle around the flames like it's Netflix. The downside? It's moody, it smokes you out, and one wrong move means you're on fire too. Romantic, in a medieval barbecue kind of way. You stare into the flickering light, hypnotized. The flames dance, crackle, and spit tiny sparks into the air like they're performing just for you. There's something almost human about it. Warm, unpredictable, slightly dangerous. The kind of relationship your mother warned you about. It gives, but it also takes. It feeds you, protects you, and occasionally reminds you who's boss by scorching off your eyebrows. Fire isn't just heat. It's civilization's first personality test. Can you manage this temperamental beast without setting the cave on fire? Can you keep it alive through the night without it sulking out into smoke? Every night is commitment, every morning a negotiation. You whisper to it, poke it with a stick, feed it carefully like it's your emotionally unstable roommate. There's an art to it, building a fire. Too little air, it suffocates. Too much, it flares up and burns your entire hut down. You can't just throw wood on it like some barbarian. Oh wait, you are a barbarian. Still, there's technique. Tinder, kindling, logs, a hierarchy of heat. It's practically a religion now. Somewhere a caveman philosopher is thinking, I burn, therefore I am. You look around your circle of fellow survivors, everyone staring into the fire, faces glowing orange, eyes glazed with the quiet 1,000-yard stare of people who've been cold for too long. No one speaks. There's no need. The fire does the talking, popping, hissing, sending up the occasional spark that lands in someone's hair. They slap it out casually. It's fine. Everyone's singed. The smell of smoke clings to everything. Your clothes, your skin, your dreams. You go to sleep smelling like a campfire and wake up smelling worse. But you don't mind. That smell means warmth. That smell means you didn't freeze in the night. You'll take roasted marshmallow over human popsicle any day. Fire is life, but also drama. Sometimes it refuses to start. You rub sticks together for what feels like forever, praying to any god listening for a spark. Finally it catches, and suddenly you're Prometheus with a superiority complex. You've done it. You've made light from nothing. You feel powerful, important, like the CEO of Warmth Incorporated, for about 5 minutes, until a gust of wind blows it out again, and you're back to smacking rocks like an idiot. At night, when the temperature drops to instant hypothermia, you curl up close to the embers. The fire crackles softly, a lullaby made of destruction. You watch the coals pulse, dim and bright, like the heartbeat of the world. It's oddly peaceful, in a we could all die at any second sort of way. The elders say fire is sacred. They tell stories about the first flame, how humans stole it from the gods, how it changed everything. You nod along, pretending you're not just thinking about how nice it would be if fire could also cook something that isn't mammoth meat for once. The spiritual stuff is fine, but have they considered stew? Then comes the worst part, keeping it alive through the night. You can't just go to bed. Someone has to stay up and guard it, feed it, tend it, stop it from dying out or burning the place down. Every tribe has one poor soul who gets fire babysitting duty. Tonight it's you. You stare at it, eyes drooping, poking the embers every few minutes like you're clocking into the world's most boring night shift. As you fight sleep, you start seeing shapes in the flames. Faces, animals, maybe your ancestors, maybe just your tired brain trying to make sense of the flicker. You whisper to it like an old friend, "Don't die, okay? I need you." The fire answers with a crackle that sounds suspiciously like laughter. Eventually, the first grey light of dawn seeps into the cave. The fire's still alive. Barely. A few glowing coals holding on forget space heaters. In ancient times, your warmth source had hooves. Families, goats, and sometimes pigs all shared one space. Snuggling wasn't optional, it was survival. You haven't known true intimacy until you've fallen asleep to the gentle sound of a cow chewing next to your ear. The smell hits you first. It's complex. A mix of hay, damp earth, smoke, and something deeply personal from the goat in the corner. But you don't complain, because that goat right now is your heating system. Every breath it exhales is 1 degree closer to not freezing in your sleep. You pull your fur wrap tighter, shuffle closer to the group, and try to ignore the gentle mooing that doubles as the world's worst lullaby. There's no concept of personal space here. Everyone, humans, animals, sometimes even chickens, huddles together in one smoky, warm, vaguely chaotic room. You, your spouse, 2 kids, a pig, 3 chickens, and a cow named Agnes. It's not glamorous, but it works. Your body heat combined could melt a glacier. You're basically a prehistoric electric blanket powered by discomfort. You shift slightly, trying not to wake the pig that's currently functioning as your lower body insulation. The cow shifts too, her massive body letting out a low rumble that feels oddly comforting. You never thought you'd be grateful for the digestive noises of livestock, but here we are. Every belch and snort is a reminder that at least something in the room is still alive. The floor beneath you is a patchwork of straw and mud, nature's memory foam. It's slightly damp, slightly warm, and very alive with movement. You try not to think about it. The ancient world doesn't have pest control, so if you feel something crawling, it's best to assume it's friendly. Outside, the wind howls across the plains. The walls creak, the roof rattles, and every draft feels like a ghost trying to join your cuddle pile. You press yourself closer to your family, inhaling the collective scent of smoke, wool, and desperation. It's oddly comforting. There's something deeply human about this closeness, like a group nap sponsored by survival instinct. You close your eyes, but sleep is tricky. The cow's tail keeps flicking against your face. The pig snores like a sawmill. One of the kids mumbles in their sleep about warm soup. You can't blame them. You dream of soup too. Thick, hot, steaming. Something that warms you from the inside out instead of this organic furnace situation you've got going. Still, you can't deny it works. Without the animals, you'd freeze solid before dawn. The heat from their bodies radiates through the air, mingling with yours until you're all one big breathing ecosystem. You can practically feel evolution sighing with relief. This, after all, is teamwork, the kind that makes it through winter. In the flicker of the dying fire, you catch sight of your reflection in a puddle. Hair wild, face streaked with soot, eyes heavy with exhaustion. You look like you've lost an argument with nature, but at least you're warm. You think about modern people, snuggled under electric blankets, complaining that the thermostat is at 68 degrees. If only they knew what true comfort used to mean, sleeping under a cow and hoping it doesn't roll over. A rooster somewhere in the corner lets out a strangled crow, confused by the firelight. Everyone groans. It's not even morning, but in this timeless cold, morning is a flexible concept. You pull your fur closer, muttering a prayer to any deity, listening for just 5 more minutes of warmth before dawn's chill seeps back in. Eventually you drift off, half asleep, half aware of the rhythmic breathing around you. You dream of warmth that doesn't smell like manure, of beds with space to stretch, of a future where people might laugh at how you lived, and maybe even make bedtime stories about it. But for now, this is life. You, your family, and your barnyard roommates, united against the cold. Every grunt, every shuffle, every animal sigh is part of the symphony of survival. It's ridiculous, yes, but also beautiful, because in this moment, pressed between a snoring pig and a snuggling goat, you're living proof that warmth, no matter how weird, always finds a way. Clothing at this point is more of a suggestion. You wrap yourself in fur, leather, or whatever didn't bite back fast enough. The smell? Let's call it earthy, and sure, it keeps you warm if you don't mind sharing your outfit with fleas, ticks, and yesterday's dinner aroma. In this era, fashion isn't about self-expression, it's about survival. You're not choosing between silk or cotton, you're choosing between still warm and already decomposing. You slip into your fur wrap, a patchy, uneven thing that used to be a bear maybe, or a particularly angry deer. It's stiff in places, soft in others, and somehow manages to smell worse every time it gets wet. But it's warm, and that's all that matters. There's no tailor, no loom, no autumn collection. Your wardrobe is whatever your hunting party didn't eat. You look down at your tunic, notice a claw still attached, and shrug. It's not a flaw, it's a feature. People don't compliment your clothes here. They ask what season it was from, as in, was that mammoth from last winter or the one before? You tie the whole ensemble together with a bit of sinew. Fashion tape, prehistoric edition. The fur scratches at your neck, but you've stopped caring. You learned early that comfort is a myth, like clean socks or personal hygiene. You're wrapped in a second-hand animal and pretending it's cosy. The first pyjama party was really just a sleepover with pelts and fleas. Your tribe gathers by the fire, everyone in various states of accidentally fashionable. One guy's wearing wolf fur, the other's sporting what might be bison, and the elder has gone full couture in fox pelts. You nod respectfully. It's like watching the world's first Met Gala, but with less champagne and more frostbite. At night you crawl into your sleeping spot, a pile of hides on top of straw. The furs creak and crinkle as you lie down. The smell of smoke mixes with old leather, and for a moment it's almost comforting. You pull the fur over your shoulders, feeling the weight of it. A heavy, living thing that presses against your body like it still remembers running. You try not to think about that part. It's funny in a tragic way. These animal skins are your best defense against nature, but they're also a constant reminder of it. Every seam, every patch of matted hair whispers a story of cold nights, long hunts, and people who refuse to die quietly. You're not just wearing warmth, you're wearing history, and possibly part of dinner. You shift, scratching under your collar. Something moves, a flea probably. You sigh. It's fine. You're all roommates here. Humans, pests, microbes. It's a shared ecosystem. You absent-mindedly scratch, then mutter to yourself that someday maybe someone will invent laundry. A magical ritual that makes your clothes smell like flowers instead of desperation. In the faint light of the fire you glance around. Everyone's asleep, a pile of fur and exhaustion. The rhythmic breathing fills the cave like a slow drum beat. It's peaceful, in that smoky, prehistoric way. You can almost forget that your pyjamas still have teeth marks in them. Outside, the wind howls across the plains. Inside, your fur muffles the noise. You curl tighter, pulling the hide around your head. You can feel the animal's warmth still lingering in the fibres, trapped there long after its last heartbeat. Somehow, that feels poetic. You whisper a quiet thank you to the creature, half prayer, half apology. Then you drift off to sleep smelling like the forest floor, dreaming of warmth that doesn't require violence. It's strange to think, thousands of years from now, people will complain that their pyjamas are too itchy. They'll have soft cotton, fluffy fleece, even silk. They'll sleep on beds that don't smell like campfire and regret. They'll have closets, actual rooms full of clean, folded clothing, and still say they have nothing to wear. But tonight, you're content. You're swaddled in the wild, protected by fur and chance. Somewhere in the distant future, humanity will invent fashion, comfort and detergent. For now, you've got your trusty bear pelt onesie and a fire that refuses to die. It's not glamorous, it's not pretty, but it's warm. And in the Ice Age, that's the highest compliment there is. Fire safety rules weren't really a thing. People built small fires inside caves for warmth, creating the first known toxic work environment. You either suffocated from smoke or froze to death trying not to. Early humans didn't invent ventilation, they invented trial by fire. Your day begins like every other Ice Age morning, coughing. Thick, eye-watering smoke clings to the cave ceiling and drifts down in lazy, suffocating clouds. It's not the kind of cosy fireplace ambiance you'd see in a modern ski lodge. It's more like hotboxing yourself with soot. You squint through the haze, trying to find the fire pit buried under last night's ashes, praying that your lungs survive another round of prehistoric heating. There's a delicate art to keeping a fire alive in a cave. Too big, and you set your entire fur collection ablaze. Too small, and everyone freezes solid by dawn. So you sit there, fanning the flames like a nervous chef trying not to overcook humanity. The cave fills with that familiar crackling sound, followed by coughing. Lots of coughing. The sound of progress, apparently. You poke at the fire with a stick that's already half burnt, your eyes streaming tears that are 10% emotion, 90% smoke. There's a faint breeze sneaking in through a hole in the wall, the closest thing you have to ventilation, but mostly it just spreads the smoke evenly across the room, ensuring everyone gets a fair share of respiratory damage. You call that equality. Your tribe gathers around the flames, squatting close for warmth but trying to avoid the eye-level smoke. There's no good spot. If you're too close, your eyebrows start to curl. Too far, and your teeth chatter like castanets. You shift around, trying to find the perfect middle ground between human marshmallow and living icicle. Spoiler, it doesn't exist. Someone suggests moving the fire closer to the entrance. Brilliant, except that the last time you tried that, the wind blew in and turned your entire bedding area into a snowdrift. Another idea is to dig a small hole above the fire to let the smoke escape. That worked until it started raining, and suddenly you invented the world's first indoor water feature. It's all trial, error, and the occasional full evacuation. The smell inside the cave is indescribable, a mix of damp stone, burnt fur, and whatever died outside recently. You've long stopped noticing it. Your nose gave up 2 winters ago. The fire crackles, sending sparks dancing into the air. Each spark is a tiny existential threat. You watch one land dangerously close to a pile of hides, and briefly consider whether hypothermia might actually be the better way to go. In the corner, an elder mumbles that fire is sacred. You nod respectfully while also wondering how something sacred can make your eyes sting this much. Still, you owe it everything. Without it, you'd be a popsicle in minutes. You love fire. You fear fire. It's the world's first abusive relationship. Every so often, someone tries to improve things. One guy stacks rocks around the fire, hoping to trap the heat. He accidentally creates the world's first oven and burns half the tribe's dinner. Another digs a trench to channel the smoke, which just channels it straight into everyone's sleeping area. Innovation hurts, literally. As night falls, the temperature drops again. The fire dims, flickering like it's losing the will to live. You toss on a handful of twigs, then another, then an entire log. The flames roar to life. Too much. Suddenly the walls are glowing, and you realise with a sinking feeling that your cave is in fact flammable. Everyone scrambles, waving hides and shouting, while the smoke thickens until it feels like breathing soup. You somehow get it under control before it turns into a full-scale disaster, coughing but victorious. Later, as you lie half-conscious in the smoky dark, the embers pulsing faintly beside you, you realise how absurd this is. Every night you risk dying just to not freeze. Every morning you wake up with a sore throat, blackened nostrils, and a mild case of cave fever. And yet, there's comfort in that glow. It's proof you're still alive. You close your eyes, the fire crackling softly. Smoke curls in lazy spirals above your head, dancing in the dim light. Somewhere in the back of your mind you imagine future generations sitting by fireplaces sipping cocoa, complaining about the thermostat. You smile faintly, coughing once more for good measure. You've done it. You've heated a cave without burning it down, mostly. Sure, everyone's lungs are charcoal, and your bedding now smells like a campfire, but you've survived another night in humanity's first sauna. In a world this cold, that's basically luxury. Fast forward a few millennia, sheep enter the chat. Wool becomes humanity's first miracle fabric, warm, durable, and capable of holding the scent of wet animal forever. You spin, weave, and pray. Your tunic doesn't catch lice halfway through winter. It's the dawn of the agricultural revolution, and you're living your best post-cave life. You've traded mammoth hunting for sheep herding, which sounds peaceful until you realise that sheep are basically walking clouds with trust issues. They're loud, they're stubborn, and they seem to find joy in running away the moment you look tired. But they produce wool, glorious fuzzy warmth that doesn't involve skinning anything. Humanity has officially entered the soft clothes era, and it's revolutionary. The first time you shear a sheep, it feels like discovering fire all over again, except fluffier. You and your family sit in a field surrounded by piles of wool, staring in awe at the possibilities. The air smells like grass, sweat, and mild confusion. Nobody really knows what they're doing yet. You try twisting the fibres together and suddenly you've invented yarn. Someone else weaves it and you've got fabric. Congratulations, you're now a fashion designer with a side hustle in industrial innovation. But let's be honest, Early wool garments are not glamorous. The texture is aggressive. It's like being hugged by a cactus. Your first tunic scratches your neck so badly you start to question your life choices, but it's warm, and in this age warmth beats style every time. You can tell how long someone's been wearing their tunic by the number of times they've stopped mid-conversation to scratch themselves like a deranged bear. You wash it occasionally, though washing in this context means dunking it in a river and beating it with a rock. The wool soaks up water like a sponge, weighs 10 pounds more and somehow dries to an even itchier consistency. And the smell. Oh, the smell. Wet wool gives off an aroma somewhere between farmyard romance and forgotten dog. You tell yourself it's comforting. It isn't. Still, the wool revolution changes everything. You no longer depend solely on hunting or stealing animal hides for warmth. Instead, you nurture flocks, shear them, and wear their hair like a badge of civilized progress. It's the dawn of textile economy. Sheep are the new currency, and your wealth walks around bleating. If you've got more wool than your neighbour, you're basically nobility. Your evenings are spent spinning and weaving, surrounded by tufts of wool floating in the air like lazy snow. The rhythmic clack of the spindle fills your hut, mixing with the crackle of the fire. It's oddly soothing, like ASMR for the Bronze Age. You hum as you work, imagining the future. A world where clothes are soft, clean, and don't come with a complementary ecosystem of lice. But of course, nature finds a way to ruin things. Wool, as it turns out, is also a perfect habitat for pests. Moths, fleas, and the occasional opportunistic rodent all adore your new invention. You hang your tunic near the fire to keep it dry, only to find tiny holes appearing overnight. The next morning you're angrily inspecting your sleeve like it's betrayed you. Fashion, it seems, has always been a battle between beauty and bugs. And yet, the world begins to feel a little more manageable. The wool traps heat, the sheep provide more every year, and you realise you've finally beaten the cold, at least a little. For the first time, you can survive winter without piling yourself under a mountain of animal skins. You stand outside on a chilly morning, wrapped in your woolen cloak, feeling almost smug. The wind bites at your face, but your body stays warm. Civilization, you think, smells faintly like sheep. The wool age brings comfort, but also identity. People start decorating their wool clothes with dyes and patterns, early expressions of individuality that say, "I'm freezing," but make it fashion. Wool blankets cover beds, cloaks become symbols of pride, and entire villages hum with the soft rhythm of spinning wheels. Humanity has discovered that survival doesn't have to look miserable. It can at least be cosy. As the sun sets over your little settlement, you hang your damp tunic by the fire, ignoring the smell. You glance at the sheep outside, peacefully grazing under the fading light. You smile, realizing that these fluffy, dramatic animals have changed everything. You no longer sleep beside them for warmth. You wear them. Progress at last has a texture. You curl up on your straw bed, cocooned in wool that scratches and soothes in equal measure. The night is cold, but you barely notice. Somewhere outside, a sheep bleats softly, and for the first time in history you don't take it personally. Congratulations, you've moved out of the cave and into a hut. Your bed, dried grass stuffed into a sack that smells like old bread. Every morning you wake up itchy, sneezy, and somehow still cold. But hey, it beats sleeping on rocks. The humble hay mattress, humanity's first attempt at comfort, is basically a sack of grass pretending to be a bed. You call it progress, but your spine disagrees. You lie down at night, feeling every twig, seed, and mystery crumb poking through the fabric. It's less sweet dreams and more mild agricultural torture. Still, it's better than bare ground, which is how low the bar for comfort is set in this century. The process of making your bed is a ritual in itself. You gather hay from the field, trying to ignore the sneezing fits it triggers. You stuff it into a large linen sack, if you're rich enough to have linen, that is. Otherwise, you use whatever fabric hasn't disintegrated this season. You pat it down, shape it into something resembling a rectangle, and tell yourself it looks inviting. It doesn't. It looks like an overstuffed scarecrow that's given up on life. The smell hits next. Hay has that fresh countryside aroma when it's new, but give it a week in your humid hut, and it transforms into rotting meadow with undertones of barnyard. You lie down, surrounded by the comforting scent of decay and mildew, and wonder if civilization was really worth it. You roll over, and the hay crinkles beneath you like a chorus of annoyed insects. A piece of straw jabs your neck. Another finds its way into your ear. You shift again, creating a tiny dust storm that makes you cough yourself awake. Romance novels may tell you about beds of straw, but they forget to mention that those beds were alive with mites, fleas, and the occasional curious mouse. Congratulations, you've invented pest hospitality. Every morning you wake up with new mysteries on your skin. Little red bumps, scratches, possibly a tiny farm ecosystem thriving in your hair. You pat your arms, sneeze 3 times, and stand up feeling both rested and allergic. You fluff the hay, spreading out the lumps and pretending that will help. It doesn't. By the end of winter, your mattress looks like it's been through a medieval war. Maintenance is crucial. You're supposed to replace the hay every few months, which sounds simple until you realise that means hauling an entire cartload of it from the barn, shaking it out and stuffing it back into the sack. You spend more time doing bed maintenance than sleeping, and when you finally finish, the mattress looks plump and golden for about 3 days before collapsing into its usual sad, lumpy shape. Despite all this, the hay bed is a marvel of early innovation. It's cheap, renewable, and doubles as insulation. Some clever folks even add herbs to mask the smell. Lavender, thyme, maybe mint if you're fancy. Of course, that just means you now sleep on a salad, but it's progress nonetheless. The truly wealthy take it a step further, layering furs or linen sheets on top. You can always tell who's doing well in life by whether or not they wake up scratching. Peasants? They wake up sneezing and immediately start their day itchy. Nobles? They wake up on imported goose down wondering what hay fever means. As night falls, you crawl back into your straw sanctuary, wrapping yourself in a wool blanket that smells suspiciously like the sheep it came from. The fire flickers low. You listen to the faint rustling inside the mattress and tell yourself it's just the hay settling. It's not. Something small and alive is sharing your bed. But at this point, you've learned to coexist. You close your eyes and think about how far humanity has come. From caves to huts, from rocks to hay. Each generation finds a slightly less terrible way to sleep, building toward that distant, glorious future where someone will one day complain that their memory foam is too firm. You'd laugh if you weren't too busy scratching your leg. So you drift off in your straw cocoon, itchy but warm, surrounded by the faint scent of grass and smoke. It's not perfect, but it's home. The hay creaks beneath you, whispering softly like an ancient lullaby. This is as good as it gets. For now. Before duvets, people just piled on animal hides until they couldn't move. It worked, mostly because hypothermia couldn't reach you under 50 pounds of reindeer. The downside, if you needed to pee, you had to file for early death. Welcome to the prehistoric bedtime routine. Part survival, part accidental taxidermy. Your bed is a pile of straw, your pyjamas are fur, and your blanket, it's basically a deceased buffalo. You drape it over yourself with a grunt of effort, sinking beneath the immense, slightly damp weight. It's like being hugged by a fridge, cosy in a terrifying sort of way. Animal hides were the first luxury bedding. Forget thread counts. Your sleep quality depended entirely on what you could hunt. A woolly mammoth meant you'd be warm until spring. A rabbit, you'd be dead by morning. Hunters didn't just bring home dinner, they brought home duvets, and somewhere out there, the first human to say, "This fur feels nice," accidentally invented the concept of interior design. The nightly layering ritual begins with the smaller hides on the bottom. Goat, deer, maybe some fox if you're feeling fancy. Then the heavy hitters, bear, elk, or, if you're truly blessed, mammoth. By the time you're done, you're encased in a fortress of fur so thick you can't move your arms. You lie there, motionless, like a prehistoric lasagna. The only thing that's moving is the colony of fleas plotting their night shift. The hides are warm, yes, but they're also alive in spirit. They creak, they smell, they shed. The scent of fresh kill lingers for weeks. When it rains, the moisture seeps in, and suddenly your bedding transforms into something between a swamp and a petting zoo. Still, you pull it tighter, because being cold is worse than smelling like death. Maintenance is a nightmare. You can't just toss your bearskin into a washing machine and call it a day. Cleaning means dragging the hide outside, beating it with sticks, and hoping the rain handles the rest. It never fully dries, but that's tomorrow's problem. You bring it back in smelling faintly of mud and regret, slap it down on your straw bed and pretend it's fresh. Your sleeping position is strategic. You tuck the edges of the hides around you to trap every ounce of warmth, effectively mummifying yourself. Movement is not an option. If you so much as twitch, cold air rushes in, and you're instantly reminded why evolution invented shivering. Need to roll over? Not happening. Nature has tucked you in too tight. Then there's the weight. The sheer, crushing, suffocating weight. Modern people pay hundreds for weighted blankets to calm anxiety. You're under 70 pounds of elk and existential dread. You're not calm. You're pinned. You couldn't have anxiety if you tried because you physically can't move to act on it. It's therapeutic, in a near-death kind of way. And yet, there's something comforting about it. Beneath all that fur, the world is muffled. The wind howls outside, but you hear only a soft rustling and the faint crackle of the fire. The hides trap not just heat, but sound, creating the first ever noise-cancelling sleep environment. You're cocooned in darkness and warmth, suspended between gratitude and mild suffocation. Morning is an ordeal. The moment the fire dies, the cold creeps back in. You'd love to get up, but first you have to escape. Peeling back the layers feels like digging yourself out of a woolly grave. You finally emerge, hair-matted, covered in fur lint, gasping like you've just been born again. The hides slide off with a wet thwump, releasing a cloud of musty air that could legally be considered a biohazard. Still, you can't deny their effectiveness. The hides keep you alive through the worst winters nature can conjure. You survive nights that would kill a less resourceful species, and for that you give thanks to the animals, to the fire, to your own stubborn will to not become an icicle. You stand, stretch, and glance at the heap of furs. They look heavy, grim, and glorious. One day, far in the future, people will sleep under soft cotton duvets and silk sheets, complaining that it's too hot. But you'll always remember what true warmth feels like, the kind that smells faintly of the wild and weighs as much as your sins. You pat the top hide affectionately, mutter a quiet "thanks," and step out into the cold. The reindeer fur stares back, unmoving. Tonight, it will wait for you again. Your ancient, hairy, slightly terrifying weighted blanket. By the Middle Ages, fireplaces became the heart of the home and the lungs' worst enemy. The smoke filled the room, blackened your ceiling, and aged you 5 years per winter. But at least it was warm, in a lung cancer kind of way. Picture it. A medieval household, huddled around the fire like moths around a candle. The hearth is not just a source of heat, it's the centre of life. It's where you cook, where you gather, where you pray not to choke on the smoke before bedtime. Fireplaces are a marvel of medieval innovation, which is to say, they're barely better than setting the floor on fire. The chimney, that thing we take for granted, doesn't really exist yet. Instead, smoke fills the hall and sort of drifts up through a hole in the roof, if you're lucky. Inside, it's a haze. The air tastes like burnt wood, roasted meat, and regret. You sit close enough to the flames to feel your eyebrows singe, but if you back away, the cold swoops in like a ghost with an attitude. The sweet spot is an illusion. Either you're melting or freezing with no comfortable in-between, and no matter where you sit, you'll be coughing by the end of the night. The soot settles on everything. Your clothes, your food, your lungs. Even your dreams smell like smoke. Medieval walls were darkened not just by time, but by centuries of fires that refused to go quietly. The ceilings turned black, beams cracked, and eyes watered. There's a reason portraits from that era always look so tired. Everyone's eyes were burning 24/7. You could spot a medieval peasant by their cough alone, a wet, hacking symphony of carbon monoxide poisoning and poor ventilation. Yet the fireplace was sacred. It symbolised life, warmth, and family. People gathered around it to share stories, meals, and gossip about how old Thomas's thatch roof caught fire again. The hearth was the home's beating heart, and to let it go out was considered both foolish and unlucky. So families kept fires burning day and night, carefully feeding them like temperamental pets. If it died, you didn't just lose heat. You lost a piece of your home's spirit. The smoke didn't just rise, it invaded. Curtains, if you were rich enough to have them, became black veils. Wooden beams soaked up the smell like incense sticks from hell. Some clever households hung herbs and flowers near the rafters to sweeten the air. It helped, but not much. The fragrance of lavender only mixed with the thick tang of burning oak, creating what could generously be described as medieval aromatherapy. Cooking over these fires added another layer of chaos. Sparks flew, fat dripped, smoke thickened. Every meal came with a free seasoning of ash. Peasants roasted meat on spits or boiled broth in soot-streaked pots. The food tasted smoky by default, because everything was smoky. And don't forget the danger. One wrong spark and the entire hut could become a bonfire. Medieval insurance. Your neighbours with buckets of mud. Eventually chimneys became more common, around the 12th century for the wealthy, later for everyone else. Suddenly, smoke had somewhere to go besides your lungs. It was a game changer, though not a perfect one. Chimneys needed cleaning, and soot build-up could cause chimney fires. Many homes burned down anyway, proving that progress is mostly about finding new ways to make old mistakes. Despite all its hazards, the fireplace brought a kind of magic to the room. The firelight flickered on faces, casting shadows that danced across the walls. On long winter nights, people found comfort in that glow. They told stories, sang songs, and warmed their hands, their hearts, and occasionally their boots. The fire was both friend and foe, beautiful and deadly, nurturing and merciless. When morning came, the ashes told the story of the night, a bed of embers, faint smoke rising, and blackened walls that bore witness to countless winters survived. Someone would stir the coals, feed them new wood, and start again. Another day, another breath of smoke. You might cough your way through life, your lungs coated in soot, your ceiling darker with every passing year. But that's the price of warmth in the medieval world. The fireplace was never perfect, but it was all they had. And as the fire crackled, casting light on tired faces, you couldn't help but think, maybe a little smoke is worth the comfort of not freezing to death. If you think sharing a bed is intimate, try sharing it with your entire extended family. Parents, kids, cousins, everyone piles in like it's a human lasagna. You learn to love spooning, or you freeze. And yes, that's someone's foot in your face. Welcome to medieval family bonding temperature edition. Privacy doesn't exist. Personal space? Not invented yet. You live, eat, and most importantly, sleep together, often in a single smoky room that smells faintly of damp wool and human despair. Nighttime isn't about rest. It's a full contact team sport against hypothermia. The family bed, or great bed, as some called it, was less of a mattress and more of a human survival strategy. Picture a pile of hay, covered with rough blankets and animal skins, where 5 to 10 people squeeze together like mismatched spoons in a drawer. You'd think it would be cosy, and it is, in a sweaty and suffocating kind of way. The warmth comes not from luxury, but from sheer body heat. If someone rolls away, you immediately feel it. Cold air rushes in, and suddenly everyone hates that cousin who turned over. Children sleep closest to the middle, the warm core of the family heat reactor. The elderly and unlucky end up on the edges, one cough away from frostbite. And there's always that one person, probably Uncle Harold, who snores like a dying goat, ensuring no one truly rests. But no one complains, because being mildly annoyed is better than being frozen solid. This isn't limited to peasants, by the way. Even nobles shared beds, though theirs were slightly fancier. Think giant wooden frames with canopies, draped curtains to block drafts, and sheets that didn't smell like livestock. But even in castles, guests often shared a bed with their host. Imagine visiting a friend, and instead of offering the couch, they pat the bed and say, "Squeeze in." Social anxiety and body odour, together at last. It's all about warmth, not romance. The phrase, "to sleep together," didn't always imply scandal. It was a logistical necessity. Everyone's asleep, fully clothed, layered in wool and exhaustion. The goal isn't comfort, it's survival. And while modern people pay for weighted blankets, these folks paid with their dignity. Of course, there were rules, unspoken but strictly enforced. No kicking, no hogging the covers, no turning your back to the fire, because that meant freezing your spine. And definitely no flatulence, though good luck policing that after a dinner of turnip stew. Every night was a gamble between staying warm and staying conscious through the orchestra of snoring, coughing and shuffling bodies. Sometimes, even animals joined in. Chickens, dogs, and the occasional goat might curl up near the foot of the bed, contributing their small but valuable warmth. It was like a medieval electric blanket, one that occasionally pecked your toes or bleated in your ear. You learned to ignore it, the same way you ignored everything else mildly inconvenient in life, like famine or fleas. By dawn, the great bed was a battlefield of tangled limbs and sleep-deprived sighs. Someone always woke up half on the floor, another with straw in their hair, and everyone smelling like they just ran a marathon in wool socks. But despite it all, there was comfort in the chaos. The fire still burned low, the room hummed with life, and outside the world was frozen solid, but inside you'd survived another night together, and maybe that's the strange beauty of it. In an age before central heating, before blankets, before anyone knew what personal bubble meant, warmth came from togetherness, literally. Every snore, every elbow jab, every muffled sneeze was a reminder. You weren't alone. You were part of something larger, warmer, and slightly smellier. So as you tuck yourself into your memory foam mattress tonight, under a perfectly climate-controlled blanket, just remember your ancestors. They didn't need heating systems. They were the heating system. And somewhere in the great smoky timeline of human history, someone looked at their shivering family, pulled them close and said, "Scoot over. We're surviving this together." When wood ran low, people heated stones in the fire, then wrapped them in cloth and slid them under their beds. It's genius. Right until the rock cracks and sets your straw mattress ablaze. The medieval version of sleeping with danger. Welcome to the age of desperate innovation, where every attempt to stay warm feels like a science experiment with a 50-50 chance of ending in disaster. Firewood is scarce, nights are endless, and frost creeps into your bones like a nosy ghost. You need heat, but you also need not to die in the process. And that's where the brilliant, slightly suicidal idea of hot rocks comes in. The method is simple. You take a few good-sized stones, preferably not the ones that explode when wet, though you'll only learn that rule after the first incident, and toss them into the fire. They sit there, soaking up the flames like prehistoric batteries, glowing faintly red, humming with heat. Once they're ready, you pull them out with tongs or a stick, or sometimes your bare hands if you've already given up on fingerskin. Then comes the delicate part, wrapping. You grab some spare cloth, usually linen or wool, and cocoon the rock like it's an ancient pet. If you're lucky, the fabric is thick enough to stop it from scorching your bed. If not, congratulations. You've just created the first medieval heating pad and the first accidental bed fire. Many peasants woke up in the middle of the night to the scent of burning straw, and the realization that warmth had, quite literally, backfired. Still, the system mostly worked. You'd slip the rock under your hay-stuffed mattress or between your icy feet, and for a brief, glorious window of time, you'd feel warmth seep through the layers. It wasn't just heat, it was hope. That fleeting comfort before it faded into another long, breath-clouded night. You could almost forget you lived in an age where heating technology involved geological hazards. This wasn't a peasant-exclusive trick either. Nobles used a fancier version, the bed warmer. Imagine a small metal pan with a long handle, filled with glowing coals, slid between the sheets before bedtime. It sounds elegant, until you realise it's still a literal bucket of fire under your duvet. Many a noble woke up to find their expensive bedding smoking, their servants panicking, and their chamber smelling like roasted goose, minus the goose. The peasants, meanwhile, relied on sheer resilience. Rocks, bricks, or even clay pots were fair game. Anything that held heat without exploding was considered premium tech. You'd see families sitting by the hearth in the evening, quietly rotating stones into the flames like they were charging them for later use. A well-heated stone could stay warm for hours, long enough to trick your body into thinking it might survive the night. Of course, there were hazards beyond fire. Sometimes the rocks cracked under pressure, sending shards across the room like volcanic confetti. Other times, they simply lost heat too quickly, leaving you clutching a lump of cold disappointment, and there was always the chance of singeing your skin. Imagine rolling over in your sleep and pressing your leg against a still too hot stone. The pain wakes you up instantly, but on the bright side, hey, at least you're warm now. Some clever folks even combined this with other warmth hacks. A heated rock wrapped in fur or tucked inside a cloth pouch could double as a makeshift hand warmer. Travellers carried them in wagons or bundled them in cloaks, creating medieval hot water bottles, minus the water, and plus the potential for mild third-degree burns. Over time, this practice evolved. By the late medieval period, wealthier households began using metal or ceramic foot warmers filled with embers or heated stones, often placed beneath the covers or inside wooden boxes. You'd stick your feet inside, sigh in relief, and try not to think about how your socks smelled faintly of barbecue. But for the common folk, it was still about hot rocks and hope. You'd heat them carefully, say a small prayer to whatever saint handled not dying of frost, and slide them under your bedding. The fire would die down, the room would grow cold, and you'd drift off to sleep with a faint glow beneath you, like the last ember of civilization refusing to go out. Every morning you'd find the stone cooled, blackened, and lifeless. You'd toss it back into the fire to recharge, because warmth wasn't a luxury, it was a daily battle. And in that small glowing stone there was something deeply human. Persistence. The refusal to let winter win. So the next time you switch on your electric blanket, remember your ancestors, the original innovators of bedtime warmth. They didn't have thermostats, they had rocks, determination, and just enough hope to get through another night without freezing. And somehow, against all odds, it worked. In wealthy homes, beds had curtains, not for privacy, but to trap body heat and prevent noble cheeks from freezing. It was basically a tent inside your bedroom. And, incidentally, the first known studio apartment. Imagine this. You're a medieval noble, lounging in your chamber, a grand room made entirely of stone, which means it's about 3 degrees warmer than the outside air if the fire's been generous. You've got tapestries on the walls, fur on the floor, and enough candles to start a small house fire. But despite all the luxury, the real hero of your nightly survival isn't your wealth, it's your bed curtains. These weren't your modern, flouncy, decorative bed drapes. No, these were serious curtains. Thick, heavy, and designed for thermal combat. They hung from the canopy, wrapping around your massive bed like a fabric fortress. Once drawn, they trapped your body heat in and the cold air out, essentially turning your bed into a microclimate. Step outside the curtains, you freeze. Step inside, you sweat. There was no middle ground. The medieval bedroom was by design an indoor wind tunnel. Castles and manor houses weren't known for insulation. They were drafty stone refrigerators decorated with optimism. Every crack in the wall whistled with icy air, and windows, if you even had them, were covered in oiled cloth or paper, not glass. So, when you climbed into bed, you didn't just want warmth. You needed a survival strategy. Bed curtains were that strategy. You pull them closed, tucking yourself into a soft, dark cocoon. Outside, the fire crackles faintly, but inside the air grows still and strangely intimate. You can hear your own breathing. The faint rustle of your linen sheets sounds louder, and yes, sometimes you hear rats. But it's your little private world, a sanctuary in a time before central heating and personal boundaries. Of course, warmth wasn't the only reason for these curtains. They were also the medieval equivalent of a do not disturb sign. In an age when servants came and went at all hours, privacy was a luxury. Your chamber door didn't lock and someone might barge in with wine, gossip, or worse, chores. So, when you drew your bed curtains, it was a silent declaration. I'm done being noble for the night. Please go away before I throw a shoe. The curtains also helped hide more social activities. Whether it was gossiping, praying, or sneaking a forbidden guest into your bed, those thick folds of fabric kept prying eyes and prying ears at bay. The medieval court was fueled by rumour, and a well-timed curtain could save your reputation. Or, if you were less discreet, it could turn your entire bed into the century's hottest scandal. But the real magic was how the curtains made the bed its own room. In a household where multiple people might share a chamber, servants sleeping on the floor, children curled up by the fire, you could pull your curtains and suddenly have your own private suite. It was like living in a luxury tent within a very cold palace. You could eat, pray, gossip, or plot treason, all without technically leaving your bedroom. Multitasking, medieval style. Some curtains were even ornate works of art. The wealthy commissioned embroidered fabrics, woven with gold thread depicting religious scenes or family crests. Others had thick velvet or wool to block drafts. These weren't just blankets on sticks. They were symbols of status. The fancier your bed curtains, the higher your social temperature. And yet, For all their beauty, they weren't perfect. They trapped heat, yes, but also smell. After a few nights of breathing in your own medieval musk, the inside of your bed could feel less like a sanctuary and more like a fabric sauna of questionable hygiene. Still, you kept them closed, because smelling yourself was better than freezing to death. Over time, these enclosed beds became more elaborate, some with sliding wooden panels instead of fabric, turning your sleeping space into an actual wooden box. These were called box beds, and were especially popular in Northern Europe. They offered the warmth of a womb and the ventilation of a coffin. Practical? Absolutely. Creepy? Also, yes. So, when you picture a noble drifting off to sleep, don't imagine an airy, romantic canopy fluttering in candlelight. Picture a heavy enclosed bed, more like a tent at a music festival than a fairy tale. Inside, you're surrounded by warmth, darkness, and the faint sound of your own sigh of relief that you're not freezing to death tonight. The bed curtain was more than just decor. It was survival architecture. It turned drafty castles into livable spaces, gave people privacy in public households, and turned sleep into an act of strategic warmth management. So the next time you pull up your comforter and grumble about the room being a little chilly, remember, your medieval ancestors had to build a fabric bunker just to make it through the night. And they did it in style, because nothing says aristocrat quite like surviving winter while wrapped in velvet, listening to your servants cough outside your bed curtain fortress. You eat soup, you drink soup, you probably sleep next to soup. Hot food wasn't just dinner, it was body fuel. A thick pot of stew kept your insides from turning to ice. Bonus, if you spilled it on yourself, congratulations, you're briefly warm. Soup wasn't just a meal, it was a lifestyle. In the medieval world, when the cold clawed at your bones and the wind howled through every crack in your hut, soup became the closest thing to central heating. You didn't eat soup because it tasted good. You ate it because it was survival in a bowl. It was edible warmth. And if you were lucky, it even contained something recognizable as food. Picture this. A cauldron hanging over the fire, bubbling slowly. It's filled with whatever you could find. Turnips, onions, wilted greens, the occasional suspicious bone. If meat made an appearance, it was probably from something that died of natural causes 3 days ago. The broth, a mysterious brown liquid that could double as paint thinner, and yet as that steam rises you feel hope stir in your chest. This is warmth you can eat. In a world without insulation or double glazing, food was one of the few ways to fight back against the cold. The peasants didn't have fireplaces large enough to heat their homes properly, and their beds were basically frost collectors. So dinner wasn't just dinner, it was internal heating. One steaming bowl could thaw your frozen hands, fog up your vision, and remind you that being alive was slightly preferable to being frozen solid. Families gathered around the pot like modern people gather around space heaters. The soup stayed on the fire all day, perpetually simmering. It wasn't just a meal, it was an ongoing project. Every few hours someone would toss in whatever they could spare. A scrap of bacon, a bit of cabbage, maybe a potato if times were good. The medieval name for this? Pottage. The modern translation. Eternal leftovers. It was an evolving dish, part soup, part stew, and all mystery. If you were lucky, it developed flavour over time. If you weren't, it developed something else, like a layer of fat so thick you could ice skate on it. But that didn't matter. When your breath fogged in your own house, hot soup was sacred. You didn't complain, you prayed over it. And there was a rhythm to it. You'd hold your wooden bowl close, hands wrapped tight around it, breathing in the steam as if it were divine incense. Each sip burned a little going down, which was good. It meant it was working. The warmth spread through your chest, into your stomach, radiating outward until, for the first time that day, you could feel your toes again. The sensation lasted maybe half an hour, but that half hour felt like heaven. It wasn't just warmth, it was community. Everyone gathered around the same pot, sharing the same spoon, gossiping about who stole whose goat or whose chimney collapsed last week. Soup brought people together because it was the only thing that could be stretched endlessly. Add more water, stir, pretend it's still food, a miracle in liquid form. And of course, it had other uses. Got leftovers? Keep the pot by the fire overnight, congratulations, it's breakfast. Need to heat your hands? Hover them over the steam, feeling lonely? Talk to the soup, it's the only thing that listens. Some people even left the pot on while they slept, so the fire's warmth, and the faint smell of boiling vegetables kept the room from freezing. In some households, the soup pot was practically a family member. Even nobles weren't above it. Sure, their soups were fancier, served in silver bowls with actual spices and less risk of botulism, but the principle was the same. Warm soup equals warm people. Medieval physicians even recommended it as medicine for everything from chills to heartbreak. Take broth, they'd say, which is basically the 14th century version of have some tea and rest. But not every soup story was a success. Some days the pot ran dry, no firewood, no ingredients, no energy to stir. On those nights, people huddled together and dreamt of soup, the way modern folks dream of heated blankets and working thermostats. Because in the Middle Ages, soup wasn't just a meal, it was the difference between shivering and surviving. So you sip your medieval soup, half broth, half questionable mystery. You blow on it, take a gulp, and feel the faint warmth bloom in your chest. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, for just a few moments, you're alive, you're warm, and life doesn't seem quite so cruel. And maybe that's why soup has never gone out of fashion. It's not glamorous, it's not exciting, but it's the purest, simplest comfort humans have ever invented. A hug in a bowl, a fire you can drink, the closest thing to central heating the medieval world ever had. The richer you were, the fluffier your coat. Fox, mink, bear. It was like wearing your tax bracket. Peasants, meanwhile, made do with itchy wool and emotional resilience. Nothing says I'm poor like frostbite in February. In medieval society, your outfit didn't just say who you were, it screamed it across the frozen countryside. Fashion wasn't about trends or taste, it was about survival and social hierarchy. The wealthy draped themselves in animals so rare and soft they could double as pets. The poor, meanwhile, wore whatever hadn't run away yet. Fur was the medieval equivalent of a luxury car, a Rolex, and a personal space heater rolled into one. The nobility adored it, not just because it looked good, but because it was one of the few things that actually kept them from freezing solid in their drafty stone castles. Every noble household had a fur inventory, an official list of which unfortunate species had been sacrificed for fashion. Fox, sable, ermine, beaver. If it was furry and warm, it was wearable wealth. Ermine was the ultimate status symbol. White, soft, and expensive beyond reason, it became synonymous with royalty. Kings, queens, and high-ranking church officials swaddled themselves in ermine-trimmed robes like fluffy divine beings. Portraits of them show shimmering white pelts dotted with little black tails, a design so iconic it later became the symbol of monarchy itself. It wasn't just clothing, it was propaganda. The message was clear: I am rich, I am powerful, and somewhere, several small rodents died for this. Meanwhile, down in the villages, peasants had a very different relationship with warmth. They couldn't afford fur unless you counted the rats that occasionally crawled up their sleeves. Their wardrobes were made of wool, thick, scratchy, and soaked in the eternal scent of damp livestock. Wool was practical, but it wasn't glamorous. It kept you alive, but it didn't make you look important. No one ever gazed at a peasant and said, "Wow, that's a fine sheep aesthetic." And yet wool had its virtues. It was durable, somewhat insulating, and renewable, provided your sheep didn't freeze before shearing season. Peasants layered it endlessly: wool tunics, wool leggings, wool cloaks. By February, you were essentially a walking carpet, and if it snowed, congratulations, you just became a woolen snowman. The social divide in warmth was stark. A noble could step outside wrapped in fox and look like a fur-clad deity, while a peasant shuffled past looking like a bundle of old socks. Laws even reinforced this difference. Sumptuary laws dictated who could wear what. If you weren't high-born, you weren't allowed certain furs. A peasant caught wearing ermine might be fined, humiliated, or accused of pretending to be someone important. In short, fashion crimes were actual crimes. Of course, fur didn't come without problems. For one, it was heavy. A full-length fur robe could weigh more than a small child, making stairs, dancing, or even breathing a challenge. And then there was the smell. Without modern cleaning methods, fur garments quickly developed an aroma best described as wet animal with a side of fireplace. You looked rich, but you smelled like a bear that lost a fight with a candle. Still, people loved it. Fur was a status you could wear, a declaration that you not only survived winter, but conquered it. Nobles flaunted their coats at feasts, hunts, and ceremonies, each trying to out-fluff the other. It was a Cold War of the softest kind. You'd see a lord swanning around in links, and his rival would immediately commission something rarer, perhaps a garment lined with exotic pelts from the far north. If social media had existed, fur would have been the medieval blue checkmark. Peasants, on the other hand, made do with creative solutions. They lined their cloaks with straw for extra insulation, wore multiple layers of patched fabric, and sometimes even resorted to greasing their skin with animal fat to block the cold. It worked, but it was far from glamorous. You didn't strut around like a noble. You waddled, creaked, and prayed for spring. Even within the noble class, fur signalled more than wealth. It indicated rank. Ermine for royalty, sable for aristocrats, fox for the moderately well-off, and cat fur for the desperate. Yes, cat. The hierarchy of hides was so entrenched that wearing the wrong kind of fur could get you labelled a social imposter. Imagine the embarrassment. Showing up at a banquet in rabbit when everyone else is in mink. Unforgivable. But the truth was, fur was more than vanity, it was survival with style. In an age where frostbite was a recurring character in your life story, fur kept people alive. It allowed kings to hold court in unheated palaces, knights to ride through blizzards, and peasants to look longingly through windows at people warmer than them. So when you see medieval portraits of nobles draped in layers of fur, looking smug and self-satisfied, remember this. They weren't just showing off. They were flaunting the fact that, unlike most of their subjects, they'd wake up tomorrow with all 10 fingers still attached. Because in the medieval world, fashion wasn't about being trendy, it was about not freezing to death. And nothing said success quite like looking fabulous while the rest of the world shivered. Those floppy sleep hats weren't just for style, they were survival gear. In unheated rooms, your head was the only thing standing between you and brain freeze-level discomfort. Plus, it hid your lice. Win-win. Long before silk pyjamas and memory foam pillows, there was one unsung hero of the medieval bedtime ensemble, the nightcap. Today, we think of it as something Scrooge wears in old Christmas movies, a quaint relic of candlelight and bad dreams. But back then, it was serious business. If you went to bed without one, you weren't just being rebellious, you were asking for frostbite of the scalp. The medieval home was not designed with warmth in mind. Stone walls trapped cold like an ancient refrigerator, and windows were more concept than insulation. By midnight, your bedchamber was a tundra. Even if you were buried under 10 layers of wool, fur and questionable hygiene, one part of you was still exposed, your head. And that's where the nightcap came in, a simple piece of cloth that stood between you and early onset icicle. Made of wool, linen, or even soft cotton if you were fancy, the nightcap covered your head, ears, and sometimes your neck. Some versions had long, pointed tails that could be wrapped around your throat for extra insulation. Basically the medieval version of a wearable blanket. Others looked more like a baby bonnet for grown adults. There was no universal design, but the mission was clear. Keep your brain from freezing while you dreamed about slightly warmer places. And this wasn't just for peasants either. Everyone from kings to blacksmiths wore them. Nobles might have their nightcaps embroidered with delicate thread or lined with fur, while common folk went for practicality. Whatever fabric hadn't already been turned into socks. The nightcap didn't care about class, it cared about survival. The science, of course, makes perfect sense. Your head loses a shocking amount of heat, especially when your entire house feels like a walk-in freezer. In the Middle Ages, where central heating meant hoping your fire doesn't go out, a cap could mean the difference between a full night's sleep and waking up feeling like a corpse with a cold. And yes, the cap had another bonus. It doubled as a stealth lice cover. Hygiene wasn't exactly a strong point of the medieval lifestyle, and head lice were practically a family tradition. A nightcap didn't stop the infestation, but it did hide it. Out of sight, out of mind. You could scratch discreetly beneath the fabric, pretending it was just an itch from the wool. Fashion and delusion, perfectly paired. But the nightcap wasn't only worn in bed. People wore them around the house too, especially during long cold mornings, when even lighting the fire felt like a Herculean task. Some versions even evolved into day caps, worn beneath hoods or helmets to provide a little warmth and, conveniently, keep the hair grease contained. Because if your hair was going to freeze, it might as well do it stylishly. Writers and scholars adored them. Monks in drafty monasteries wore them while copying texts by candlelight. poets in unheated garrets wrote sonnets to the rhythm of their own chattering teeth. The nightcap became a quiet companion of creativity, proof that you could look ridiculous and still produce brilliance, as long as your ears didn't fall off. Of course, nightcaps weren't without their hazards. Get too close to a candle, and your bedtime headgear could go up like a festive torch. The smell of singed wool and singed dignity was apparently not uncommon, and if you tossed and turned in your sleep, the long tail could twist around your neck, giving you the world's least glamorous bedtime accident. Still, for all its oddities, the nightcap endured for centuries. It was a nightly ritual, a small comfort in a brutal climate. You'd finish your evening stew, douse the fire, crawl under your mountain of blankets, and pull that soft cap over your head. In the dark, it felt like a shield, a barrier between your fragile human body and the freezing, indifferent world. By the 18th and 19th centuries, as homes got warmer and beds got cosier, the nightcap began to fade. But it lingered in bedtime culture, immortalised by literature and art. Ebenezer Scrooge wore one. So did Santa Claus, apparently. Even today, cartoon characters snooze in pointy hats that trace their lineage straight back to medieval survival gear. So the next time you see an old-fashioned nightcap and think, "That looks silly," remember, your ancestors wore them because they had to. They weren't trying to be cute, they were trying to not freeze to death. That floppy hat was their thermal crown, their badge of endurance, and yes, their very effective lice camouflage. It may not be a fashion statement anymore, but in its day, the nightcap was nothing short of revolutionary, a cosy symbol of human stubbornness against the cold. Because when winter pressed its icy nose against the window, the medieval sleeper didn't just hide under the blankets, they armed their head with fabric and faith, and said, "Not tonight. Frostbite." In some households, servants slid metal pans filled with hot coals under the sheets before bedtime. It worked beautifully, unless someone forgot to remove them, in which case your evening turned into spontaneous combustion, the home edition. Long before heated blankets and thermostats, warmth was an extreme sport. You didn't just turn up the heat, you created it, one ember at a time. The fire pan, or bed warmer, was one of humanity's more creative, and mildly terrifying, attempts at staying cosy during long frozen nights. Imagine a frying pan with a lid, attached to a long wooden handle. You'd fill it with glowing coals, carry it to your bed, and slide it between the sheets to chase away the chill. Practical? Yes. Safe? Absolutely not. The ritual was part science, part bravery, and part faith. A servant, usually someone with both strong nerves and expendable status, would fetch hot coals from the hearth, shovel them into the pan, close the lid, and march toward the master's bedroom. The goal? To preheat the bed without accidentally burning down the house. The servant would then slide the pan back and forth between the linen sheets, praying that the fabric didn't catch fire and turn the whole process into an impromptu Viking funeral. When done right, it was pure magic. The sheets grew toasty, the chill fled, and for one glorious moment, you could pretend you lived in a world where winter didn't exist. But when it went wrong, and it often did, the results were spectacular. Beds went up in flames, servants were accused of witchcraft, and entire households found themselves watching their comfort upgrade become a bonfire. The design didn't help much. The metal pans could overheat easily, and sparks sometimes escaped through small cracks or loose lids. And since most beds were stuffed with straw, hay or wool, they were basically tinderboxes waiting for a spark. More than one noble went to sleep in luxury and woke up in a scene from Dante's Inferno. Despite the danger, bed warmers became a staple of upper-class life across Europe. They were symbols of wealth and sophistication, proof that you could afford a servant whose job it was to risk fiery death so you didn't have to sleep cold. They even became decorative objects, crafted from polished brass, engraved with ornate patterns, and sometimes gifted as wedding presents. Because nothing says romance like, "May your nights be slightly less fatal." The lower classes as usual improvised. Peasants couldn't afford such luxuries, so they used bricks or stones heated in the fire instead. Wrapped in cloth, these makeshift warmers were placed at the foot of the bed to radiate heat through the night. It wasn't glamorous, but at least it didn't involve turning your home into a charcoal pit. Still, even that carried risk. One crack too many, and your cosy stone could explode like a grenade. Some people took the idea a step further, slipping the warmed coals into metal boxes built into the walls or beneath the floorboards, trying to create a primitive version of central heating. These early innovators probably congratulated themselves on their ingenuity, right before their floors caught fire. Humanity's relationship with warmth has always been a balancing act between comfort and chaos, and yet, the bed warmer wasn't just about heat, it was about ritual. The clatter of the pan, the soft hiss of the coals, the faint smell of smoke, these sounds and scents became the lullaby of winter evenings. People trusted the glow of embers to drive away the night's cold, and perhaps symbolically, the dark itself. It was fire tamed, barely, and brought to the most intimate space, the bed. Over time, the device evolved. By the 18th century, some clever minds tried filling pans with sand instead of coals to reduce the fire risk. Others invented ceramic bed bottles, precursors to the modern hot water bottle. These were safer, but less dramatic. No sparks, no danger, just quiet warmth. The transition marked a subtle shift in human priorities. From survival to comfort, from thrill to control. Still, there was something strangely romantic about those early bed-warming nights. The flicker of firelight, the creak of wood, the smell of linen and smoke. It was a dangerous kind of coziness, one that made you appreciate every moment of warmth you got. Because in those days, warmth wasn't a guarantee. It was something you earned, through effort, ingenuity, and a bit of reckless hope. So, when you crawl into your perfectly temperature-controlled bed tonight, spare a thought for your ancestors. They didn't have radiators or blankets that plugged into the wall. They had fire in a pan and a prayer that their dreams wouldn't literally ignite. It's a testament to human stubbornness, really. The willingness to flirt with disaster in exchange for a few hours of comfort. The bed warmer was both a marvel and a menace. A shining symbol of our eternal struggle against the cold, and our equally eternal tendency to make that struggle unnecessarily flammable. When all else failed, alcohol helped. Not medically, but emotionally. Peasants drank ale to feel warm, which worked until they passed out in the snow. Nature's way of saying, that's enough beer. In an age where insulation was a fantasy, and firewood was worth more than your dignity, people had to get creative to survive the cold. And by creative, I mean drunk. When warmth was scarce, beer became the medieval version of central heating, a liquid illusion of comfort, courage, and occasionally unconsciousness. For peasants, ale wasn't a luxury, it was practically a survival strategy. Water was unsafe, milk spoiled fast, and wine was for nobles. But ale was reliable. It was brewed in homes, taverns, monasteries, anywhere there was grain and despair. And during winter, it became the peasant's best friend. They'd gather around a wooden table in a smoky tavern, clutching clay mugs of brown, cloudy brew, each sip tricking their bodies into believing that maybe, just maybe, they weren't freezing to death. The science, of course, didn't back them up. Alcohol dilates your blood vessels, sending warm blood to the skin's surface. You feel warm because your skin heats up, but in reality your core temperature drops faster. It's a betrayal in liquid form. But in the 1300s, nobody cared about medical nuance. If your nose was red and your cheeks flushed, that meant the beer was working. And people needed that illusion. Imagine trudging home after a 12-hour day of farm labour, soaked in sleet, your hut colder than a tomb. You sit by the dying embers of your fire, your hay bed waiting like a pile of frozen regret. What do? You pour yourself a tankard, take a gulp, and suddenly life feels slightly less cruel. For a few blissful minutes you believe warmth exists. Ale wasn't just a drink, it was social glue. Taverns served as the communal hearths of medieval life. Inside, laughter echoed off wooden beams, the fire crackled, and for once everyone forgot that outside the world was made of ice and taxes. Songs were sung, dice were thrown, and drunken philosophers debated the mysteries of life, like whether it was better to freeze sober or dream warm and tipsy. But this beer blanket came with its hazards. Too much ale and you'd wander home in the cold, convinced you were impervious to winter. Many never made it back. Chronicles from the period are filled with grimly casual accounts of men succumbing to the elements after a night of festive cheer. Translation: they passed out in a snowdrift and became one with the landscape. The upper classes weren't immune to this logic either. Nobles loved their wine, mulled with spices and heated by fire until it became a rich aromatic potion. They'd sip it in grand halls while minstrels played, believing themselves immune to both frost and consequence. Hot wine, mead, cider, all were part of the same delusion, that warmth could be bottled and swallowed. Some monasteries even brewed strong ales for medicinal purposes. The monks probably told themselves they were doing God's work, but let's be honest. When your abbey walls are frozen and your robes thinner than your patience, divine inspiration starts to look a lot like a pint. Of course, not all alcohol-induced warmth was happy warmth. For some, it was desperation. Winters were long, brutal, and hungry. A mug of ale numbed more than the cold. It dulled hunger, loneliness, and hopelessness. It was a tiny rebellion against the elements, a liquid no to a world that didn't care if you froze. Even the language of the time reflected this coping mechanism. Expressions like warming the spirit and filling the belly with fire were common. Alehouses advertised themselves as places of good cheer and warmth, though most provided only one of those things. And while today we warn about the dangers of drinking to forget, for medieval peasants, forgetting was the only way to survive another endless freezing night. In a way, the beer blanket was more than a metaphor, it was an attitude. It said, "We may be cold, but we're not dead yet." A pint was courage in liquid form, laughter in hard times, and denial made drinkable. It united people across classes and centuries, from monks brewing in stone monasteries to farmers huddling in barns. So yes, beer didn't actually warm anyone, but it felt like it did. And when your life was measured in harvest and hearth fires, feelings mattered more than facts. Warmth wasn't just about temperature, it was about hope, community, and the human refusal to go quietly into the cold. So, next time you sip a cold beer by a cosy fire, raise a silent toast to your ancestors, the frostbitten dreamers who discovered that, even if alcohol couldn't save them from winter, it could at least make them laugh in its face. Because sometimes, surviving isn't about staying warm, it's about feeling warm long enough to make it to spring. Some families literally slept in barns for warmth. Yes, voluntarily. Surrounded by cows, sheep, and the occasional surprised rooster. It was noisy, smelly, and weirdly cosy. Basically the medieval version of camping inside a petting zoo. When the cold came rolling in and the hearth fire dwindled to a weak glow, medieval logic kicked in. Why freeze in your bed when you can snuggle with something that naturally emits heat and farts? For peasants, barns weren't just for animals, they were the ultimate winter survival strategy. Forget down comforters. Try a 200-pound cow radiating 100 rounds of body heat. It wasn't glamorous, but it was effective. The move to the barn wasn't a desperate last resort, it was planned. As winter deepened, entire families would pack up their few belongings and migrate from their cottages to the byre, the section of the barn where livestock slept. The barn walls, thick with thatch and packed with straw, trapped heat far better than the drafty wooden planks of a peasant hut. Add a dozen animals to the mix, and suddenly you had nature's version of central heating. It was a system born out of necessity and, oddly enough, efficiency. Animals stayed warmer, and thus healthier, and humans got to sleep without shivering themselves awake. You might have smelled like manure by sunrise, but at least you woke up alive. Of course, it wasn't exactly peaceful. The soundtrack of the night was a mix of bleating, snorting, and occasional chicken-based chaos. Cows shuffled and farted like thunder, sheep bleated in their sleep, roosters, confused by firelight or moonlight, crowed at 3 a.m. And if you were lucky, a wandering rat or two would politely remind you that personal space didn't exist. Yet for many, this arrangement became a rhythm of life, a strange kind of family intimacy shared across species. Children would fall asleep to the deep rhythmic breathing of cows, mothers would hush babies under the soft clatter of hooves, and fathers would toss hay into the pen before lying down beside it. The barn was noisy, yes, but it was also warm, and warmth meant survival. Hygiene, however, was another story. Straw floors doubled as bedding and bathroom for both humans and animals, which meant mornings were fragrant. Fleas and lice were as common as breakfast, and the air was thick with ammonia from animal waste. But after months of snow and frost, comfort mattered more than cleanliness. When your choices were smelly warmth or beautiful death, the decision wasn't hard. This wasn't limited to the poor either. Even some rural landlords and minor nobles had livestock sleeping beneath or adjacent to their living quarters. Some medieval houses were actually designed this way. One half for people, the other for animals, separated by a wooden partition that shared the warmth while keeping hooves off your pillow. It was architecture born from brutal practicality. Use every degree of heat available, and in a strange way it worked. Cows and humans shared an unspoken contract. You give me warmth, I give you food. In spring, the peasants would move back to their homes, clean out the barns and start the planting season, grateful to have survived another winter, even if they smelled like the inside of a goat. Some historians call this the Great Bed Migration, but to the people living it, it wasn't migration, it was adaptation. Medieval Europe didn't offer much choice. When nights dropped below freezing and winds screamed through cracks in your cottage walls, even pride froze solid. There was no shame in sleeping with your livestock. There was only gratitude that something in your world still radiated warmth. There was also a sense of community in it. Villagers often helped each other secure safe barn spaces or reinforced thatch roofs before winter. For a few months every year, humanity stepped a little closer to its animal kin, not in regression, but in solidarity. It was humbling, smelly, and oddly heartwarming, literally. Modern readers might recoil at the idea, but think about it. Today we pay extra for heated blankets, weighted throws, and cosy farmhouse vibes. Back then, peasants were living the original rustic aesthetic, complete with hay mattresses, ambient barn noises, and natural insulation courtesy of Bessie the cow. So while it might sound bizarre to our 21st century sensibilities, the Great Bed Migration was one of history's most practical, low-tech hacks. It blurred the line between home and barn, man and beast, dignity and necessity, and somehow it worked. Because when winter came knocking, medieval peasants knew the truth we often forget. Warmth doesn't care about elegance. It doesn't care about comfort or pride. It only cares that you wake up breathing. And if that meant sharing your bedtime with a herd of sheep and one overly curious rooster, well, that was just another night in the medieval co-living experience. If you were rich, your bed wasn't straw. It was stuffed with feathers. Soft, yes, but also alive. Because birds sometimes hatched in them. Nothing like waking up to a goose judging your life choices. For the medieval elite, a feather bed was the ultimate status symbol. It said, I don't sleep on hay like a peasant. I sleep on the essence of bird. It was soft, expensive, and deeply impractical, which made it perfect for the nobility. In a world where warmth was a matter of survival, owning a bed that could swallow you whole in softness was the medieval equivalent of buying a heated swimming pool you'd only use twice a year. These beds weren't just filled with any feathers. Oh no! Goose down was the gold standard, prized for its lightness and warmth. Duck feathers were acceptable but looked down upon literally and socially. If you had swan feathers, you weren't just rich, you were obnoxiously rich. These beds could take months to make and cost as much as a small herd of cows. And yes, some of those cows were probably sleeping more comfortably than the people who owned them. The making of a feather bed was an ordeal. Servants would pluck birds by hand, one feather at a time, often while the birds were still alive. Because cruelty, it turns out, was part of the luxury package. The feathers were then cleaned, in theory, dried, and stuffed into massive linen sacks. The result? A mattress that was soft, breathable, and carried the faint aroma of regret and poultry. But here's the problem with stuffing your sleeping surface full of feathers. You've essentially built a nest. Nature doesn't discriminate between a human noble and a confused goose. It wasn't uncommon for leftover eggs to hatch inside the mattress, leading to the occasional midnight chirping from beneath your back. Some historical accounts mention servants having to shake the bed each morning to make sure nothing living remained inside. You think your memory foam is high maintenance? Try keeping your bed from reproducing. Despite the featherbed's luxury status, it wasn't exactly ergonomic. Over time, feathers would clump together or escape through the seams, poking sleepers like tiny daggers. Waking up with a feather in your nose was practically a rite of passage, and because cleanliness wasn't exactly medieval Europe's strong suit, the beds often absorbed sweat, dirt, and the kind of odours that make you question life choices. A noble might smell like lavender oil and roasted meat by day, but by night their beds smelled like a damp duck. Still, the feather bed became a kind of social theatre. Visitors would gossip about who had the finest bedding, who imported their feathers from the best geese, and whose mattress was flatter than a serf's purse. Feather beds were often passed down as heirlooms treasured for their craftsmanship, and because replacing them required another round of mass bird plucking, which was a whole production. For the lower classes, feather beds were a distant dream. Most peasants slept on straw mattresses stuffed into rough linen, or even sacks made of old grain fabric. These were called palliasse beds, itchy, flat, and sometimes home to more life than the person sleeping on them. So while nobles worried about their goose nests rustling, peasants were busy shaking out mice. Comfort, it seems, was always relative. But even among the rich, the feather bed wasn't just about luxury. It was a symbol of power. Warmth, softness, and the ability to sleep through winter meant you had control over the elements. To lie on a feather bed was to proclaim that nature had been tamed, plucked, and stuffed beneath you. It was warmth as dominance, softness as proof of status. Of course, maintaining such decadence took work. Servants were responsible for fluffing the beds daily, lifting and shaking the heavy mattresses to redistribute feathers and let air circulate. Neglect that, and you'd end up sleeping in a lumpy crater surrounded by the faint scent of poultry stew. Eventually, feather beds became symbols of both wealth and vanity. Poets mocked nobles for their bird-filled clouds, and moralists claimed soft bedding made people lazy and sinful. Yet despite the criticism, feather beds endured, because no matter how guilty it made you feel, nothing compared to sinking into that soft, luxurious warmth after a cold medieval day. So, yes, feather beds were expensive, impractical, and occasionally alive. But in a time when freezing to death was a realistic bedtime outcome, you couldn't really blame the wealthy for wanting to sleep on something that reminded them they were still, gloriously, alive. And if the price of comfort was a little bird chirping under your spine now and then, well, that was just the sound of privilege. Share warmth, save lives, wasn't just a slogan, it was survival math. Families calculated who radiated the most heat and arranged beds accordingly. The chubby uncle was suddenly everyone's favourite blanket. Before thermostats and electric heating pads, the average family ran on a simple, brutally efficient system: maximise body heat, minimise frostbite. Every person was a walking radiator, and bedtime became less about comfort and more about thermal strategy. The idea was simple: your body was currency, and warmth was wealth. The fatter you were, the higher your market value in the family bed economy. In winter, houses were cold, bone-deep, breath-clouding, freeze-your-bread in the pantry cold. The fire in the hearth did little more than heat the space immediately around it. Bedrooms, especially in peasant cottages, were barely insulated boxes that felt like sleeping in a polite refrigerator. So, humans did what humans do best. They improvised. They huddled. They formed what might be called the medieval sleep pile. It wasn't romantic, it was survival. Parents, children, and sometimes extended relatives crammed into the same bed like sardines with joint pain. Placement was critical. The smallest and weakest, usually children, were placed in the middle, protected by the warm, snoring bulk of adults on either side. This wasn't affection, it was thermodynamics. You weren't tucked in because you were loved. You were tucked in because you were useful insulation. Every household developed its own system. Some rotated positions nightly to avoid frostbite on one side. Others assigned permanent warm zones, like a bizarre, flesh-based seating chart. And heaven help the poor soul who snored, twitched, or hogged the blanket. One wrong move, and you might find yourself demoted to the edge of the bed, a one-way ticket to hypothermia. For bigger families, things got even more communal. In cottages with only one bed, multiple generations often shared the same space. Grandparents, parents, and kids all piled together under a heap of coarse blankets and woolen cloaks. Privacy didn't exist. You learned early that modesty froze faster than water. Good night was less of a farewell and more of a team chant. All right, everyone, try not to die tonight. And in this strange, shivering democracy, hierarchy melted away. The eldest son, the proud patriarch, irrelevant. What mattered was heat output. The burly uncle who worked the forge all day, prime property. The thin cousin who fainted at the sight of blood, expendable. Families didn't fight for inheritance, they fought for proximity. The warmest bodies were luxury real estate. Even outside the home, the logic of body heat economics ruled. Travellers on the road would huddle together in inns, often sharing beds with complete strangers. It wasn't scandalous. It was practical. Waking up alive was preferable to social discomfort. There are records from medieval innkeepers describing guests bundled together for warmth, and you can almost hear the collective shiver of awkwardness as a dozen freezing men tried not to make eye contact. In some regions, people even developed heat-sharing rotations. During especially brutal winters, families took turns sleeping in the same house, concentrating warmth and resources. Imagine your village's version of Airbnb, except instead of booking a cosy stay, you're booking a night in a room full of sweaty peasants trying not to cough on you. And yes, this system wasn't limited to peasants. Even nobles in their drafty castles resorted to body heat balancing acts. While they had more layers and larger fires, stone walls were terrible insulators. Servants often slept in the same chambers as their masters, not for convenience, but for temperature control. It was like a human climate system. One noble, several servants, and an assortment of dogs strategically arranged to trap warmth. Dogs, by the way, were highly valued for this purpose. Small lapdogs like the Maltese or the Toy Spaniel weren't bred for guarding. They were bred as portable heaters. Wealthy women often slept with them at their feet, creating the original foot warmer. The term three-dog night, used centuries later to describe freezing conditions, has roots in this tradition. And then there were couples. Romance in the Middle Ages was practical. Cuddling wasn't an act of passion. It was self-preservation. There's nothing like frost creeping into your bones to make spooning seem deeply necessary. Newlyweds learned fast. The secret to a long marriage was body temperature compatibility. Despite its absurdity, this communal warmth strategy worked. People survived brutal winters through collective resilience, and maybe a little shared suffering. The act of sleeping close wasn't just physical warmth, it was emotional warmth too. In a world where nature was indifferent and the nights could kill you, human contact was proof that you weren't alone. Sure, it was messy, smelly and filled with elbows, but it kept people alive. And that's the beautiful, ridiculous thing about history. We've always found warmth, one way or another, whether through fire, fur, or family. So next time you complain that your partner runs hot, remember, there was a time when that made them the most valuable person in the room. Because once upon a very cold night, love wasn't measured in words or gifts. It was measured in degrees Fahrenheit. Bathing in winter? Forget it. The water was freezing, and doctors said warm baths made you weak. So people just layered dirt like an extra coat. At some point, your grime was your insulation. To the modern mind, just don't bathe sounds like a punchline. But in the medieval and early modern world, it was survival strategy and medical advice. The science, science, of the time held that bathing opened your pores, letting in disease, evil vapours and bad luck. Combine that with rivers frozen solid and bathtubs the size of soup pots, and personal hygiene went right out the frosted window. In cold months, bathing was something you bragged about not doing. Physicians wrote solemn treatises warning that water weakens the humours, a fancy way of saying, you'll die if you wash too often. People believed cold water could shock the body into sickness, while warm water invited pestilence by relaxing the skin. The result? Generations of people choosing filth over fever. Dirt was literally considered a protective layer. And honestly, it worked, sort of. You didn't get pneumonia if you didn't stand naked in a cold stream. Instead, you marinated quietly in your own body oils, wearing a fine glaze of humanity that probably kept out a few germs and a few friends. Laundry didn't fare much better. Washing clothes was back-breaking, freezing work done in rivers or communal wash-houses. In winter, the effort wasn't worth it, so most people wore the same linen shift or wool tunic for months. Peasants might air out their clothes by hanging them near the fire, which only made them smell like smoke and despair. By February, a medieval shirt could probably walk away on its own. The upper classes had more options, but often worse logic. Nobles replaced washing with perfume. They layered scented oils, powders and flowers, turning themselves into walking potpourri bags. A courtier might not bathe for 6 months, but he'd drown in rosewater daily. One French noblewoman famously bragged she hadn't touched water in her life, because she claimed it ruined complexions. Her servants quietly confirmed she also ruined entire rooms. Ironically, filth was a social equaliser. Peasants, nobles, monks, everyone stank. Even royalty couldn't escape it. Castles were draughty, and water had to be carried in buckets from wells or streams. Heated water was a luxury, so most bathed only for special occasions, like weddings or coronations, or when someone died, which coincidentally often followed bathing. Still, the body found ways to adapt. Skin thickened, hair matted. Layers of grime formed a kind of grimy armour, trapping natural oils and blocking draughts. Peasants believed dirt sealed in warmth, which, in its disgusting way, was true. Sweat and soot made a paste that acted like medieval Vaseline. You didn't need lotion when you were coated in 3 months of smoke and cow grease. And since everyone smelled equally catastrophic, nobody complained. It wasn't until foreign visitors, particularly from the Islamic world, arrived with regular bathing habits that Europeans began to suspect maybe cleanliness and civilization could coexist. Medieval Muslims had bathhouses, heated floors, and even scented soaps, while European peasants were still congratulating themselves for surviving February without freezing or dissolving. Communal bathhouses did exist in medieval Europe, especially in cities, but their reputations went downhill fast. By the 14th century, many doubled as brothels, and the church declared them immoral. The Black Death didn't help either. People blamed bathhouses for spreading disease, not realising it was rats. So the whole washing together thing got shut down in favour of pious solitary filth. By the Renaissance, dirt had gone from a sign of laziness to a badge of purity. Physicians and priests both preached that washing was a gateway to sin. Why scrub away what God gave you? Plus, if you were covered in enough layers of wool, soot and prayer, maybe the smell wouldn't escape. Spoiler, it did. Winter was the worst of it. With frozen rivers and icy floors, even the bravest washer waited for spring. Instead, people used dry baths, a fancy term for wiping themselves with linen cloths dusted in flour or herbs. Think of it as medieval dry shampoo, but for your entire body. If you were lucky, you had a servant to sprinkle powder into your underclothes. If you weren't, you just prayed your neighbours were equally fragrant. So, by the time spring rolled around, people didn't just welcome the sun, they welcomed the chance to scrub their existence off. Clothes were boiled, bodies scraped, and lice evicted in massive seasonal cleaning rituals. But for a few long, dark months each year, everyone accepted that they were less individual humans and more walking compost heaps with ambition. It's easy to judge from our modern, lavender-scented world, but you have to admire their endurance. No deodorant, no plumbing, no hot showers, just faith, wool, and a resilient sense of denial. They weren't clean, but they were alive, and in the medieval winter, that was the only hygiene standard that mattered. Medieval churches were spiritual refrigerators. Stone walls, no heating, and hours-long services meant faith had to keep you warm. Priests preached through chattering teeth while parishioners quietly froze into holiness. Stepping into a medieval church in winter was less like entering a house of God, and more like walking into a beautifully carved meat locker. The air hung heavy and still, each breath a visible puff of devotion. The massive stone architecture, majestic in summer, became a perfect heat sink in winter. Those thick walls trapped cold like a secret, and once November arrived, they refused to let it go until Easter. For the average medieval worshipper, going to church was a test of endurance. You'd shuffle through snow in your heaviest wool cloak, clutching a candle that did nothing except drip wax on your hand, and find a spot on the cold stone floor that wasn't directly under a draught. Within minutes your toes were numb, your breath fogged in front of you, and the priest's Latin chants sounded less like prayer and more like the rhythmic cracking of frozen lips. To make matters worse, there were no pews in most churches until the late Middle Ages. That's right, no sitting down. You either stood, knelt, or shuffled awkwardly from foot to foot while your knees screamed for mercy. Imagine standing barefoot on stone for 2 hours while a man in a robe tells you to be grateful, and you were. Because if you complained, you were told to offer it up as a form of holy suffering. Hypothermia as a virtue. How very medieval. The priests didn't have it much easier. Their robes were made of heavy wool or linen, which helped a little, but they were still reciting Mass in near Arctic conditions. Some even wore gloves with the fingertips cut off so they could still turn pages or hold the chalice. The more resourceful ones slipped small heated stones into their sleeves, an ancient version of hand warmers, though these often cooled halfway through the sermon, leaving them muttering both psalms and curses under their breath. Ironically, the very design that made churches so awe-inspiring also made them thermal nightmares. Gothic cathedrals with their high vaults, open naves, and stained glass were engineering marvels, but they were also impossible to heat. Fires were out of the question. Not only were they a hazard, but smoke would stain the sacred artwork and suffocate the congregation faster than sin. So the cold was just accepted. Holiness, after all, wasn't supposed to be comfortable. To cope, people layered multiple tunics, woolen socks, fur-lined cloaks. Wealthy worshippers brought fur muffs or even portable metal foot warmers, tiny boxes filled with coals that radiated gentle heat and occasionally set pews on fire. The poor, meanwhile, relied on proximity, huddling together for warmth in the back pews, exchanging side-eye glances that said, "If I faint, take my spot near the candle." And candles. Oh, the false promise of warmth. Thousands flickered across cathedrals, filling the air with golden light and melted wax but no actual heat. You could stand inches away from one and still feel like an icicle. The illusion of warmth became part of the worship experience. Light symbolised divine presence, but physical warmth, that was for the afterlife. Then came the holy water, literally freezing. Dipping your fingers into it in mid-January was a spiritual trial by ice. The devout still did it, of course, crossing themselves with all the grace of someone electrocuted. Some churches tried to keep the holy water from freezing solid by placing it near candles, but the effect was minimal. In especially cold regions, priests just chipped through the ice and declared it holy slush. Choirs suffered too. Singing in unheated cathedrals was an act of bravery. Notes would come out brittle and flat, and breath clouds rose like incense. The organ pipes often froze, producing ghostly off-key tones that made the whole experience sound a little more apocalyptic than intended. Still, people came, because despite the misery, the cold church was where community gathered, where hope flickered like a candle in the frost, and maybe that's what made it bearable. The shared discomfort bonded people. They stood shoulder to shoulder, trembling, listening to sermons about eternal salvation, and quietly hoping that heaven had central heating. The cold wasn't just physical, it was communal, a reminder that faith, like warmth, was something you built together, even when your nose was running and your soul was questioning your life choices. When services finally ended, people rushed out into the cold like it was somehow warmer than inside. Outside, the wind stung their faces, but at least it moved. Back home, they'd huddle by the fire, thawing out their fingers and wondering how priests still had the courage to hold mass without freezing mid-blessing. So yes, medieval churches were breathtaking, magnificent, and spiritually uplifting, but also fundamentally iceboxes with stained glass. Faith kept people there longer than comfort ever could, and maybe, just maybe, that's the truest miracle of all, not the architecture, not the sermons, but the fact that an entire civilization willingly stood in a stone freezer every week and called it divine warmth. Frostbite, pneumonia, and just being cold forever were common causes of death. Getting sick wasn't a question of if, but when. If you made it to spring, congratulations. You've unlocked the next level of misery. Hay fever. Before antibiotics, vitamin supplements, or even the concept of washing your hands on purpose, winter was a biological horror movie. The season wasn't just about snow and coziness, it was about which member of your household the cold would claim next. Every gust of wind carried not just frost, but the whisper of illness, and every sneeze might as well have been an omen. The medieval and early modern winters were relentless. Homes were drafty, beds damp, and diets tragically lacking in anything resembling nutrition. The human body was basically under constant assault from the elements, starvation, and bad advice. If you didn't freeze to death, you probably coughed yourself there. Winter sickness, as it was often called, was an umbrella term for anything that left you pale, wheezing and regretting your life choices. Pneumonia was a crowd favourite. It hit hard and stayed forever. You'd start with a chill, then the fever would rise, and before long your lungs sounded like wet parchment. Medicine of the time offered little comfort. Doctors prescribed things like garlic, mustard poultices, or, if you were lucky, leeches. If you were unlucky, they'd balance your humours by draining half your blood. Imagine being half frozen, coughing up phlegm, and being told that losing more bodily fluids would definitely help. Then there was frostbite, the quiet killer. In a world without proper boots or gloves, fingers and toes were disposable accessories. People who worked outdoors often lost extremities, and the rest of the body followed soon after. The poor wrapped their hands in scraps of cloth, while the rich wore fur-lined gloves that were never quite thick enough. Farmers, shepherds, and blacksmiths all knew the pain of frostbite firsthand, literally. Some learned to recognise the sweet burning numbness as a sign to stop, but many didn't until it was too late. And let's not forget hypothermia, the universal equaliser. You didn't have to be outside to freeze to death. It could happen in your own bed. A dying fire, a drafty roof. And a night colder than a tax collector's heart could turn even a nobleman into a popsicle by morning. Some chroniclers described finding entire families peacefully asleep, which is medieval code for everyone froze together and now the cat's in charge. The irony was that, in trying to stay warm, people often made things worse. Indoor fires filled homes with smoke, causing chronic coughs and lung infections. The smoke blackened walls and ceilings, and lungs too. The combination of cold air, smoke inhalation and malnutrition was the perfect recipe for a short, wheezy life. And oh, the medieval cures. If you had winter lung, you might be told to drink warm ale mixed with honey, onions and a dash of hope. Some swore by sleeping near livestock, believing the animal's breath could restore vitality. Others stuffed herbs into their clothes to ward off evil airs. The placebo effect was doing heavy lifting. Children and the elderly suffered most, of course. Infants were wrapped in layers of wool until they resembled portable sausages, while the elderly were often left to rest by the fire, which was medieval shorthand for try not to die before supper. Every winter was a test of endurance, and only the strong or the lucky saw spring. Even nobles weren't safe. Castle walls were beautiful but brutally cold. Drafts slipped through arrow slits, and tapestries did little to stop them. Nobles shivered under mountains of furs and complained of winter agues, a charming phrase for every illness known to man. A servant's job wasn't just to fetch food, but to make sure their lord didn't freeze mid-prayer. And yet, for all this suffering, people adapted. They learned to read the signs of illness before it struck. A chill in the bones, a dull ache in the back, the nose of sorrow, as some called it. They shared remedies, stories, and superstitions, because knowledge was all they had. One village might swear by hot broth made from sheep's head, while another believed rubbing your feet with goose fat could save your soul and your toes. Then came the cruelest twist: spring. After surviving the long freeze, people finally emerged into sunlight, only to be attacked by pollen, mould, and the vapours of the thaw. The same peasants who'd prayed not to freeze were now sneezing their way through hay fever season. The irony wasn't lost on them. You either coughed in winter or sneezed in summer. There was no in-between. Winter diseases didn't just kill, they defined life. They dictated how homes were built, how clothes were layered, and how people prayed. Faith was as much about survival as salvation. When a priest blessed you with holy water in January, half the congregation probably flinched from the cold splash. So yes, frostbite, pneumonia, and general frozen despair were the plagues of the cold months. But surviving them gave life an edge of triumph. Every spring thaw was a small resurrection. Every sunrise that didn't find you coughing was a miracle. In the medieval world, staying warm wasn't just about comfort. It was about living long enough to complain about the next winter. Sometime around the 14th century, people figured out weaving thicker wool layers could trap heat. Thus the blanket was born. Humanity collectively sighed in relief, then argued about who got the bigger piece. Some traditions never die. Before blankets, medieval sleep was a tragic combination of shivering, layering, and wishful thinking. People piled whatever they could find over themselves at night. Animal skins, cloaks, old sacks, even straw. A bed was less a piece of furniture and more a DIY survival station. You didn't tuck yourself in, you buried yourself. The discovery that woven wool could act as a dedicated heat trap changed everything. For the first time in history, sleeping warm wasn't just a privilege, it was a craft. The earliest blankets weren't elegant by any means. They were thick, scratchy, and smelled vaguely of sheep, but they worked. And that made them revolutionary. Wool, with its natural lanolin and dense fibres, was the medieval miracle material. It repelled water, trapped air, and resisted fire. When people figured out that weaving wool into thicker, looser layers multiplied those effects, they stumbled upon the medieval equivalent of central heating. Suddenly, warmth wasn't just something you fought for, it was something you could manufacture. Credit for popularising the blanket as we know it often goes to Thomas Blanket, a Flemish weaver who lived in Bristol, England during the 14th century. Whether or not he actually invented it is debatable. Textiles had existed for centuries, but his name stuck because he did something remarkable. He industrialised coziness. His workshop produced heavy woolen bed coverings so popular that blanket became the generic term. In a way, he was the Steve Jobs of warmth. He didn't invent the idea, he just made it marketable. The first users of blankets were, unsurprisingly, the wealthy. Nobles loved the idea of sleeping under soft, layered wool instead of stiff animal hides. They commissioned blankets dyed in deep blues and reds, sometimes embroidered with family crests or lined with silk. For them, warmth was still a luxury, but now it was a beautiful one. A noble's bed could have 3, 4, even 6 layers of woven wool, each heavier than a modern comforter, and servants who spent their nights hauling those layers back into place. Peasants, meanwhile, had simpler versions, coarse wool or undyed cloth woven locally, often by hand. The process was gruelling. Shearing sheep, cleaning the wool, a euphemism for soaking it in stale urine, spinning it into yarn, and weaving it on wooden looms. It could take weeks to make one decent blanket. Families often shared them, draping a single heavy piece over everyone at once. Arguments over who hogged the covers were as old as the blankets themselves. The invention of the blanket didn't just transform sleep, it transformed daily life. People began using them as cloaks during the day, wrapping themselves in thick wool to stay warm while working. Travellers carried them on long journeys. Soldiers slept under them between battles. Even hospitals and monasteries, which had previously relied on straw bedding and prayer, adopted blankets as a matter of health and comfort. In a sense, the humble blanket became humanity's first portable shelter. Of course, cleanliness was another story. Wool blankets were not exactly easy to wash, and most people didn't even try. The lanolin made them somewhat water-resistant, but after months of sweat, smoke and proximity to unwashed bodies, they developed their own ecosystem. Washing a blanket required soaking it in cold river water and beating it against rocks, an activity that likely destroyed more blankets than it cleaned. Most people just aired them out in the sun and pretended that counted as hygiene. In time, blankets became a symbol of care and love. Parents wrapped infants in them, travellers were sent off with one, and when someone died, their blanket often doubled as their burial shroud. In a world where warmth was survival, giving someone your blanket was the ultimate act of kindness. It wasn't just fabric, it was life. As weaving technology improved, blankets became more colourful and intricate. Guilds of weavers experimented with dyes, patterns, and thicknesses. In colder regions, double-woven blankets emerged, trapping air between layers for extra insulation. In wealthier homes, blanket chests became prized furniture, sturdy wooden boxes used to store these precious items away from moths, damp, and opportunistic relatives. By the Renaissance, the blanket was no longer a novelty but a necessity. It crossed class lines, uniting kings and peasants under the same concept of comfort. And while materials evolved, from wool to cotton to feather-stuffed quilts, the psychology remained the same. The blanket represented warmth, safety, and a buffer between human fragility and the uncaring cold. It's funny to think that something so simple could change human history. But in a world where survival often hinged on the difference between cold and warm enough, the invention of the blanket was as revolutionary as fire itself. It made nights quieter, sleep deeper, and life just a little more bearable. And as for that age-old argument about who gets the bigger share of the blanket, that apparently is the one medieval tradition we've lovingly preserved. Some things never change, only the thread count does. You're lying under a real blanket now, warm, safe, and only slightly itchy. For the first time, you can sleep through the night without frostbite nibbling your toes. Civilization, at last, has achieved comfort. Sort of. Imagine it. A smoky medieval room, a flickering fire and the gentle creak of wooden beams overhead. Outside, winter howls like an angry ghost. But inside it's different this time. You're not huddled next to a cow, you're not wrapped in a damp animal hide, and you're not suffocating under 50 pounds of fur. Instead, you're under something miraculous. A blanket. It smells faintly of sheep and humanity, but it's warm. It's yours. And for the first time in human history, cozy isn't just a dream, it's a feeling. The first cozy night wasn't perfect. The bed was still a sack of straw that poked like 1,000 little daggers, and the blanket's edges were coarse enough to exfoliate your skin. But compared to the endless centuries of shivering and smoke-choked sleep, this was luxury. You'd pull that woven wool up to your chin, exhale, and feel the astonishing sensation of heat staying with you instead of fleeing into the night. It was the medieval version of switching on central heating, and it didn't even require setting the house on fire. People didn't realise it at the time, but this small innovation reshaped the rhythm of life. Sleep became deeper, longer, and, dare we say, better. Before blankets, cold dictated everything. When you went to bed, how you slept, how early you woke up. Comfort wasn't part of the conversation, but now, under your new woven miracle, you could drift off without fear that the dawn would find you frozen solid. That changed everything, from health to mood to productivity. A well-rested farmer ploughed straighter lines. A well-rested blacksmith hit fewer thumbs. A well-rested peasant might even remember to pray for something other than heat. The psychology of warmth also began to evolve. For centuries, sleep had been about endurance, a nightly battle against nature. But once people experienced true comfort, they began to associate warmth with peace, safety, even love. Blankets weren't just fabric. They were emotional armour. Mothers wrapped newborns in them. Couples shared them on cold nights, and families passed them down like heirlooms. A good blanket became a mark of stability, the kind of thing that separated barely surviving from actually living. But of course, nothing in medieval life stayed purely wholesome for long. The newly comfortable also discovered a new set of problems: laziness and oversleeping. Priests began warning against the sin of sloth, claiming that staying in bed too long was an affront to God. Some even preached that the devil whispered to those who lingered under blankets past sunrise. And yet, people did it anyway. Because for once, the devil was warm. The blanket also changed social rituals. Evening became something to look forward to rather than dread. Families gathered by the fire, telling stories before retreating to their beds. Lovers lingered longer, snuggled beneath woven wool. Children stopped crying from cold and started dreaming instead. You could argue that civilization's first truly peaceful dreams began the moment someone decided to weave comfort into fabric. In towns, markets began selling blankets in every variation imaginable. Heavy winter ones, thinner summer ones, dyed blankets for the rich, and plain, rough ones for the poor. Owning more than one became a status symbol. Travellers carried them on long journeys, soldiers tucked them under armour, and pilgrims thanked God for them on freezing nights. Wherever humans went, the blanket followed. A portable piece of home. Of course, luxury breeds expectations. Soon people began stacking blankets, 2, 3, sometimes 4 at once, to chase that extra layer of comfort. The rich went further, combining blankets with feather beds and canopies until their sleeping quarters resembled miniature fortresses of warmth. Servants, meanwhile, returned to their hay piles, muttering about divine injustice and plotting to steal their master's extra cover. But the significance of that first cosy night stretched far beyond class. It marked the dawn of a new relationship between humans and their environment. For the first time, we weren't simply enduring nature, we were outsmarting it. The blanket was a symbol of control, a small human victory against the cold, cruel indifference of the world. It said, "We may not have conquered fire, but we've learned to keep its warmth." Lying there, under that woven miracle, you'd feel something ancient stir in your bones, a sense of peace your ancestors never knew. The kind of peace that comes from not having to fight for survival, at least for a few hours. You'd listen to the wind scratching at the shutters, the faint pop of the dying fire, and the steady rhythm of your own breathing. It was quiet, safe, almost holy. and as you drifted into sleep, your last thought might have been something like gratitude, not just for warmth, but for progress, for the small, clever triumph that turned endless suffering into something almost tender. The first cosy night wasn't just about comfort, it was about hope, proof that even in the coldest, hardest times humans could invent softness. It's easy to forget now, wrapped in electric blankets and heated sheets, that night was a milestone in our long, uncomfortable journey towards civilization. The moment we learned that survival didn't have to be miserable, that warmth could be made, shared, and kept. And with that discovery, humanity didn't just sleep better, it dreamed better. So, as the last embers fade and the cold wind of history drift through the imagination, take a slow breath. You've walked, barefoot and half-frozen, through thousands of years of human stubbornness. You've slept in caves beside goats, huddled under hay, choked on fireplace smoke, and worn furs that still had their previous owner's fleas. You've survived frostbite, famine, and the world's most dangerous bedtime routine, all for a little warmth, and somehow they made it through. The people of those times didn't have thermostats or thermal socks, but they had something better: endurance. They adapted, improvised, and found comfort where comfort didn't belong. A flicker of fire, a shared blanket, a bowl of soup. Small miracles that kept humanity going through the long frozen dark. Their nights were hard, but their spirit burned steady. Now, here you are, wrapped in soft sheets, surrounded by walls that don't leak, breathing clean air warmed by invisible systems you never have to think about. Every quiet hum of your heater, every cozy sigh beneath your blanket is a luxury your ancestors could never imagine. So tonight, as you close your eyes, take a moment to honour them. The ones who fought the cold so you could rest in warmth. The ones who built comfort out of struggle. You don't need to light a fire, or sleep next to livestock, or pray your blanket doesn't catch lice. You just have to breathe. Feel the warmth on your skin. Listen to the silence they never had. The world outside is cold, but you, here, now, are safe, warm, and home. Sleep well, humanity has earned it.